Hello, Philip.
Hello.
Welcome back to Hungary.
I'm so happy to be back.
We are so happy you are here, and thank you for spending time with us, with Színház. We are going to have this discussion with you about your career. Before I introduce you, I wanted to ask you if you had only one word to describe yourself and your work, what word would you pick?
You gave me that question last night and I thought about it a lot. I thought about connector.
Connector.
But then it wasn't big enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm a builder.
Builder. Wonderful.
I'm a builder. I'm trying to build relationships, long-term relationships. I come from a theater culture that's very young, that is not very good, right? There have been some flashes of wonderful things that have happened in my theater, but it's, when I graduated from graduate school, I'm 81 now, there was this new movement that was 10 years old called the regional theater movement. Mm-hmm. And other than that, I could have gone to the professional route. Now that was the original American theater with the capital T. The British brought over acting companies and they played in the colonies, and the actors were the last person on the totem pole. And that was it. Until the beginning of the 20th century, when the second, the third, and the fourth theaters were made, all in a cluster of time in the teens, around the post-World War I. The first first theater class was taught at the university, at Harvard, or Yale, I forget which, but one of the Ivy League schools. And tonight, in America, there are thousands of productions in universities. There was the community theater, the amateur theater, that was born at the same time, that would get Broadway scripts the year afterwards. And they were done across the country. Tonight, there are thousands of community theaters that are celebrating their 115th season, right? And then this strange man named Eugene O'Neill went up to Massachusetts, and I marked that as the starting of the alternative or the avant-garde, and that was it. And tonight, in New York and in most major cities, and then in really strange places in America, there are people that are making theater. And that's what I was faced with. A 10-year-old regional theater that already was beginning to show some cracks. And for some reason, I was aware of how important place was in theater, to really feel like I was not on the sidewalks of New York, but my feet were in Tennessee, or my feet were rooted in Florida, or in Iowa, all these strange places. And I began to think a lot about that and see it as the sixth theater. And essentially have given my life and my interest in theater that was either just inside the margins or just outside the margins.
Philip, tell me, when you realized that American theater, as you started your sentence, is not very good, you had to go abroad to see that this is not very good, or you realized without traveling internationally?
I think when you're young, you dream of theater. And most of the time when you see theater, and I dreamed big, I dreamed wondrous things about what the power the theater could have. And I found it first with Grotowski. A good friend of mine that I went to graduate school with, and I graduated with a master's degree from Catholic University in Washington, D.C. in 1963, 62 or 63. And this was my best buddy. And we lost touch with each other, and then he became one of the major chroniclers of Grotowski after Grotowski left the theater and started the paratheatrical work. And I read about Grotowski in America, and he said Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. And I saw Richard Menon's name there, and I called up Richard and I said, Richard, Philip, I said, can you give me 40 tickets? I said, I want to invite 40 of my best friends to come see this work. I had read about...
Which show was that?
Apocalypsis, Configuris. And I had one man who was part of the Sixth Theater movement in North Dakota who drove 3 days to come see Apocalypsis Configuris. And it was life-changing. I had never seen theater. I felt like if Grotowski had asked Richard Cieslak, oh, don't cross from here to there, why don't you get up and levitate? That he could have done it, right? And it just, and I was trying to create an East Coast circuit because I had the theater in Baltimore. I'd helped start a theater in Philadelphia that was doing the same thing. Menon started a theater in Pittsburgh called the Pittsburgh 99-cent Floating Theater. But then about 2 years later, I get a phone call from a man named Tony Abison, who is traveling incognito with Grotowski.
Why incognito? It wasn't an official
visit. He was just, he'd come back from India. You know, the early Grotowski was like a box. He wore a black suit and a black tie, black glasses, he was a chunky guy, right? And he goes to India. The hair, the Grotowski that you see, the hair is long, he's got the beard. And Tony calls me up and says, Philip, I've been traveling with Grotowski. We've been on the West Coast, and he's looking for a partner to do a project called The Pillar of Fire. And it's, he told me a little bit about it. And I'm going to go into it in a little, but I was terribly interested. He said, we can't find a partner, and I thought about you. Could we come visit you? And I had 3 mentors, and he was really one of the first mentors because what he taught me, everybody in America were doing all the exercises and towards a poor theater. And, you know, I used to weigh 100 pounds more than I weigh now, and I wasn't about to stand on my head and do that. But what he taught me was the clarity of seeing the inside and the outside of a project. Because what the Pillar of Fire was about is he'd found a mountain in Poland, and he wanted to find a mountain in America. And he had this wonderful image of the audience coming in on helicopters to the top of the mountain and using the technology of the day to have this pillar of fire that could be seen from outer space, okay? Big outside thing, he said, and we'll get Jacqueline Onassis to come right here. He said, but then halfway down in the mountain would be a band with 2 or 3 protected research places. And then at the bottom of the mountain would be 2 or 3 open places to community. Mm. And maybe there would be 7 companies on the mountain, and they would move up and down like that. And oh, that excited me. And so he invited me. He said, well, I'm doing, Poland is hosting the Theater of Nations in 1975, and I'm doing the University of the Theater of Nations in Wrocław. I want you to come, and I'll take care of you, and bring some interesting Americans. So I brought Leonardo Shapiro, dear poor dead Leo with the Shalico Company. I brought some people from Tennessee. I brought some people, I think, from Theater X in Milwaukee. And, you know, it was Peter Brook, and Peter Brook was there. Barbara was there. So that was opening me up to a kind of theater that just didn't exist anywhere else. So Poland was the first place that I spent a lot of time in, and
It's the 70s.
Hmm?
It's the 60s and 70s.
In the 70s, mostly. My great mentor was Martha Coignet, the director of the American Center of ITI. And ITI played such an incredibly important role in the Cold War because it was the ticket out. You could, you know, Margaret Simmel was able to leave Poland and go to, you know, Paris, France, or Marseille, or wherever there was a Congress or a Theater of Nations. Theater of Nations, besides the 75 in Warsaw, and then Grotowski doing the University of the Theater of Nations. That festival was an ITI branded festival that started after the Second World War. And so for, I think, a decade or more, it was in Paris. But then they decided to make it peripatetic.
Yes.
And that moved around. Then Martha and Ellen ingrained in me this distrust of organizations, distrust of the government.
You still have that.
and commitment, not, you know, you're a great director and I loved your show, and then the next one wasn't very good, so I put you aside. But making investments in people, and that's been
your philosophy.
My philosophy. That's been my life, and it's so rewarding to still be in the game at 81, making this trip. You know, none of us could travel for 3 years. And I felt when I got here, you know, I have such histories. I was at the VIG last night. I met Peter Rudolph, the new director, and I knew half of the cast. Mm-hmm. I knew the actors. I knew Bela Fetzbaum when he was at the Academy. Mm-hmm. And my connection with Hungary
I wanted to have a question because when you were talking about the International Theatre Institute as part of this Cold War, it was the ITI through which you come in contact with Hungary, or it was a separate way?
It was ITI, and I started a conversation with a really smart man, great English, but more importantly, he could talk to me about what was really happening here, George Lignel.
It was a meeting here, or it was in the US, or somewhere else?
I didn't come here until I just checked. My first trip here was in '83, so 39 years ago.
And when and how did you meet Lengyel György?
Well, he was on the XCOM, and I was Martha's nephew. I went to 10 congresses. I was the young boy. I was 30, in my early 30s, and later became a board member of ITI. And as Martha got older, she leaned on me more. We traveled a lot together, and the delegations from America at the congresses and at the festivals would always change. She would bring a lot of different people, but I was one that always got invited, and I think Martha she had to have seen something in me. We were, I think, in East Berlin for the Congress in '83, and George invited Martha and me to come to Hungary, and that was the first time. And
through the ITI, or under the umbrella of the ITI? Yeah. And tell me about Hungary in 1983, coming from US, but you already had some experience of Eastern Europe through Poland and Bulgaria. How was that visit?
I remember this young 30-year-old that I sat on a committee with in ITI named Laszlo Marton. And he was very proud to show me. I mean, I remember we connected when they were rebuilding the VIG, and they were at the Nyugati Pályaudvar, and all their offices were in train cars, and they had scooped out this amphitheater. I saw the second general rehearsal of Ostans, the show that opened that theater, the night before Pina Bausch saw it. And then I saw it with my wife the second night, and Lotzi was saying, "What do you think, Philip?" And, I was really worried about it. And 2 weeks later, when the theater opened, there were two big pieces in the New York Times. One of them was about this jewel of a physical theater that had been reborn, and the other was about Ostans and I probably took 50 Americans to see that piece, because that was, it was half autobiographical. I saw a young Rabiel Fodi there, and the first directors that, I have a long history and brought Robbie to America. I brought Peter Husti to America to direct. Janos Sass, Eniku at Arena Stage. I saw Janos's Mother Courage, and sitting next to me was Molly Smith, the director of Arena Stage, on one side of me, and on the other side was Rob Orchard from American Repertory Theater at Harvard in Cambridge. And I would have been really, it was one of the first big delegations I brought here, and I would have, and I'd had many trips. I knew the there, that there was a there. And I would have been really happy had they said to me, "Well, this is very interesting work, Philip. We need to pay some attention to this." Instead, they gave Janos 2 contracts.
Ah.
And he came to ART and directed the Mother Courage. He remounted Mother Courage with American actors. And then he went to Arena and did one of the most controversial productions of Streetcar.
This was late 90s? Or early?
I think it was earlier than that.
Earlier than mid-90s, maybe?
Yeah.
Mm. You already had created CITD, Center for International Theatre Development, which in a way follows ITI. And when the whole Cold War ends, you feel the necessity to create your own organization. Tell me why.
I was so drawn to the theater here, and I had a big theater in Baltimore. I had 100 people working for me. I had $1 million budget. I had an empire, and I gave it up.
After 2 decades?
After 2 decades, I gave it away and didn't touch it for 10 years because I've gotten shorter. I used to be 5'11", and I'm now 5'7", right? So as you get older, you get shorter. But founders just get bigger and bigger and bigger and cast a big shadow. And I wanted to give my successor, who I grew into the theater, he was a volunteer. There have been 4 directors of the theater since me. But for 10 years, I wanted to get out of his way. I didn't want to be on the board. I didn't want to, well, let me tell you what I would do now, because he needed to make it his own theater. I don't trust institutions, and I wanted to be much more nimble, and I wanted to focus on where I thought the most interesting theater I'd ever seen was here. And the great love affair that I've had with the theater in this country, when I went to Poland, it was a director's theater. It was a auteur's theater. So I was already building, and it was my need to jettison the institution and my need to follow my heart. I did a lot of work in Poland and brought a lot of directors over, Warlikowski and Jarzina and some of the big names, Lupa. But my heart really found its home in this country. And I think it was because when I got here, I saw a theater. I love actors, and I thought this was an actor's theater. It's changed a little bit, but I never forget Peter Husty. He was in a terrible production of The Tragedy of Man at the Madách.
By Imre Kerényi, probably.
Yes. And he came down from the balcony and was playing God, right, in this creaky chair. And I had to go see it, and I think he was embarrassed, and I was embarrassed, and it was late. And so we did go, the restaurants weren't open, so we had dinner together in the buffet. And then he said, well, I'll take you to your hotel. And we walked out the stage door, and we'd been in there for an hour. And there was an older couple still waiting at the stage door. And Peter was, I think still is, an incredibly handsome man. And back then, you know, the hat was put on just right and the trench coat. And Peter always looked at me like he just stepped off the stage, right? If I go to lunch with him, he had this. And so he stops, and they talk for like 10 minutes. And I stand off to the side, not wanting to. And then I'm happy there, and he's talking. And then he comes to me, and we get in the car, and he said, they were so sweet. They told me they saw me play Adam when they first got married. And then they saw me play the devil. They had their son graduated from college.
Oh, okay.
Right? And they really wanted to tell me that this was so important to them to see me. And I just, and then I've just seen the best acting I've ever seen. And I've seen the Rustavelli, I've seen Ramaz Chidbatsi, I've seen some pretty good actors in my day. But, you know, I can watch Geza Hegedus do a one-man show, and there's a gesture. He just makes a gesture. And the gesture is reinforced by, and I don't speak Hungarian, but I know that's an honest connection to this and this. And I know that something is going on in his feet at that moment, that he's totally there, he's totally honest in the moment. And it awes me as a one-time young actor. And it has a laminate to that individual, trying to look at that individual, not the piece, because the audience will never meet János Szász directing. They'll see János's work, but they'll never feel like they can come out and touch him. They can't wait at the stage door to talk to János Szász. They can't wait at the stage door to talk to William Shakespeare, right? Or Peter Karpathy, right? But they can wait at the stage door and talk to Geza, to talk to Peter. I went last night to see Harvey, and I knew half of the actors on stage. I knew Edith Belislovitz when she was a student. I knew Bela Fitzbaum when he was playing character roles when he was 25 years old, and he's been at the Vig ever since. It's such a great joy for me to see that work that I simply don't see anywhere else. And that's why when it came time for me to sort of center my work with CITD, and everybody was running off to Prague. Oh, you love Prague, Philip. I said, no, I'm going to make it Hungary. And I've never, ever been disappointed.
Tell me, Philip, in the past 3 decades, if you were to name like 5 or 6 big achievements of CITD in Hungary, what would that be?
I probably have brought over that 3 decades 100 Americans to see this work.
Who came here to experience what is Hungarian theater.
Yeah, so making those introductions. So that's the first thing.
As an achievement.
As an achievement. trumpeted in America and in my trips all over Europe, a young director named Barát in Kretikor that I thought was breaking new ground, and finally got him to America. And they spent $24,000 on lawyers to get visas for these people. And I think the budget for this thing was huge. It was like $250,000. And I went out for the opening. And then I took my 2 associate directors and Thomas Schatzai, who was a chronicler of Arpad's. And the piece was brilliant. He built this with about 8 Americans. And I did a television interview on HowlRound TV at the end of it, and it was the last day. I was going back to Baltimore, and Arpad was leaving back for Hungary. And Arpad and the leaders of this company were talking to me, and they said, you know, we've agreed that we want to continue to work together. And it doesn't need to be
that
big like this. You know, if we can find 3 weeks where you could come to Hungary, and they already have a date next summer to go to Avignon together and camp in a tent, right? Arpad and his family and the couple that run this. And I just got a new funder who's done a lot of work with playwrights, and they're very interested in Eastern Europe, and they've just given us $50,000, which is a lot of money. $50,000 for a project, and then we think $10,000 a year just in general. And they had one of my associate directors, Howard Shelwitz, used to run Woolly Mammoth Theater in Washington, so he's had relationships with them, but I came to the table for the Zoom kill, right? And I said, well, you know, I know you're in the business of supporting new playwrights, but it just seems to me, and I told this story, that if instead of just the product, if what we're really talking about is a living playwright, and these relationships are made, you know, add to the end of that grant $10,000 for them to get together after they do the project. And this was like a whole new idea to them, right?
I would like you to go back to the idea of the achievements in Hungary. You said the big group of Americans coming to Hungary. You said about discovering Kretikor and bringing Arpad to work recently.
János Sász's
Yes,
career.
you already mentioned János' big project.
But that's really big. I had dinner with János 2 weeks ago in Washington. He'll be directing at Arena Stage, which is the premier, it's the second most important theater outside of New York in America. He'll be directing Angels in America. And when he was in Boston, he directed the Mother Courage, but then he directed the training program. He had a real strong connection in Boston. And a movie star named Deborah Winger, who played an officer and a gentleman and won an Academy Award. And her husband was a member of the ART company. She's going to be in his production of Angels in America. And he invited me to the first table read on February 22nd, so I'll come down and sit and listen to them read the play the first time, and then I'll be there for opening night. But he's had a substantial career in America. And then I brought Robbie. Originally, Robbie was going to direct redirect his merchant that we saw here with Jim Nicola and the director of the Portland Center Stage. And we couldn't do it in New York, and so he did it in Portland, and then Robbie has done some opera directing in America, but we broke the ice for him in America.
And also in the past 1.5 decades, you worked intensely with independents, and many people like Andrea
Bella.
Béla Pinter, Ördög Tamás, Boros Martin.
Yeah.
First, tell me about why I think your focus changed in the past decade to independent scene from the so-called big repertory theater directors.
No, I was the tail end, when I first got here, the tail end of those 4 or 5 independent companies in the 60s. Squat was one that I brought over, but I remember going to Skaney and seeing that work. Through the ITI, it was the Hustipeder, and George was then directing in Debrecen, and both of them connected to me to other people. But the first independent festival, I brought 7 people to that Kati Laban and Fodor Tomas did. And that really was the beginning. And then, I saw Robbie in that light. I saw Stereo Act. Aniko Ratz invited me to meet him, Martin Borosh. And I love Martin, and he's really good. He knows how to work with Americans. And we did 3 projects. Bella, I've loved. I thought he was the Molière, one of the most talented people I know, and I'd seen him way early. And when I saw The Champion, I just it spoke to me as an American about all the duplicity. I say we do 4 things. We show up.
Come, visit, make
we
connection.
Show up,
yeah.
Right? And then we witness. That's more than showing up. That's beginning to have an investment in people we're witnessing. And then it's very important to me that we help tell the story, that there's something going on here that the rest of the world should know about, and certainly the rest of America. The 4th thing is help artists take the next step. And that grew out of my describing what I do as having 3 moves. That's 10 years ago I said, well, I've only had 3 moves. And the first move is to travel around. They used to call me ubiquitous. I was everywhere. And I'd meet this director, and I'd get to know this director. And then I'd meet this director over here, and I'd know that director. And then I'd think, there's this director in Romania. Do you know Nina Chirano? You say, no. I said, how about I get the 2 of you together? And so I buy you an airplane ticket.
That's your philosophy, to buy an airplane ticket.
I'll buy her an airplane ticket or a train ticket. And that was my second move. First move here, second move there. And then what I used to gently call my genius move.
Step back.
And let it happen. The world upside down. And that, in my view, in my country, and probably in most of the world, international exchange was like an iceberg. And what was above the waterline was a Polish company, an Israeli company coming over here with Polish or Israeli or Hungarian artists, criticor, coming over and playing with Victor Bodo in the early days and showing, with subtitles or whatever. That was international exchange. And right at the waterline was Martin Borosh, Bella Pinter coming to work with American artists. So we were aware of that. Oh, this is Ivo van Hove coming to work at New York Theatre Workshop. And then below that, hidden, was pretty much the work that I've given my life to, was helping tell the story, letting people know there's a lot more of Horatio that is dreamt of in your philosophy, that is dreamt of in your idea of theater, and it's all around you if you'll just look. And then underneath that is the building of relationships, of personal relationships that can last. You and I have known each other for 30-something years, right? And I've watched you grow and become who you are now. And that there's no, you can't bottle that, right? There has to be that curiosity. It sounds corny, but there's love involved in it. There's respect that's involved in it. There's wonder that's involved in it. You still surprise me. And, people that I've known for 40 years still can surprise me. And I surprise myself. I'm not who I was 30 years ago. I hope I'm a little wiser. I know that the older I get, the more I look at every day as a gift. That I'm here, I look at this trip as such a healing time for me, because I missed you all so much. And just to be here, and it's, there's two new staff members outside who are traveling with me and making life easier. I've gotten stronger since I got off the plane 2 weeks ago here. So I think that's turned upside down now.
Tell me about this upside down in relationship to a very new project of yours, which you cooked after the collapse of the Theatre Academy in Budapest and after the Free SFM movement was created. And it's nice to see here in this room somebody who is a member of the Free SFM, because our cameraman is from the Free SFM. And you launched this Linkages project. What is this about?
When finally the occupation ended and the control changed, I felt this intense need to help. And where do I help? How can I help? And I knew that there was, the numbers I was dealing with was 140 students refusing to go back or to go to this new thing, 60 faculty. I talked to you, I talked to Laszlo, and I talked to Mati Gaspar and said, what do you think about finding 7 out of the 140 who are curious who are interesting, who are diverse, you know, not all directors, not all actors. You haven't asked this question, but I'm cooking up, as I'm moving into the third year of Linkage's Hungary, I'm now asking them to tell me what they would like to do prior to getting on airplanes. And one of the suggestions is to make the reach particularly, well, on both sides, the American side and the Hungarian side, a little wider. So many of them in there, as we start up again in January, will be inviting, the Hungarians will be inviting one or two people from their circle of friends to join us to kick around. So instead of a 3-person Zoom, it might be a 6-person Zoom in some sort of creative electronic thing, and then eventually put them on airplanes.
So it's mostly about building connections and
Second?
building connections between people.
Well, I tell them all that it's not, for me, it's, and this drives people crazy, but the results that I'm looking won't be known for 20 years. Mm-hmm. If you guys have found somebody that you're now 25 years old and you've got a life in the theater that, if you're as old as I am, you got 60 more years. And if you're just a normal person, maybe you got 40. Well, are you going to need to, isn't it going to be helpful to have somebody who's not in your frame of reference, mm-hmm. who you can talk to? And it's a simple but I think deeply important, and it's out of, if I go back to the iceberg, the real, you know, the Bella Pinter thing started, the Boers started with making those commitments that then find their way up to that water level, or eventually find their way up to the, but I think touring is going to be very, very difficult. Visas are going to be very difficult. Theaters right now are, in America, even for projects, have, you know, had planned a year or 2 years ahead of time, so there's a blockage of, well, I'd really love to have Janos come and direct, but, you know, I've got a project that's been on hold that we've already invested money in. I exist for you, not for the Americans. And I've been hearing stories about this youngest generation just not, you know, having either to make their own work, but, you know, there's not a thriving independent sector that's ready to welcome them in. I asked Upor, I said, is it going to be safe for me to come? You know, my name is sort of out there. And he said, no, he said, I don't think any of us are going to go to jail. I think we're just going to be starved to death in the independent sector. So I'd like to raise some money to give travel grants in Europe.
Philip, tell me, why don't you trust institutions?
I've learned about Max Korchkin's theater playwrights, that he was going to open this theater when I was in bed because of the time difference, and I sleep next and I check my email because the world has already started over here. And before I got out of bed, I commissioned 23 plays. I spent $23,000. And I didn't have to ask anybody. I didn't have to call a panel together. I didn't have to cover my ass. I made that decision, and that's what it takes right now.
Just to explain for those who don't know who Max Kurochkin is, he's a Russian playwright who left Russia, and he
was a Ukrainian playwright who was one of the, Maxim Kurochkin was one of the founders of Theater Doc in Moscow, and with Virapayev, that whole, the Prezhnikovs, the whole group of new Russian drama 20 years ago, he was the breakout. He wrote a play called The Kitchen.
We saw it together in Moscow.
Yeah.
At the Golden Mask Festival.
That was, in this little box, and then all of a sudden was on big stages with big stars, toured, and he made a lot of money. And he smelled what was happening in Russia, and he left 6 years ago and has never written a word in Russian again, and started to work with 24 playwrights and got a space, and that's very much like Theater Doc. It's a little cleaner, but about the same size. It's called the Theater of Playwrights. It was to have opened March 9th, and the war started the 24th. Max was in the Ukrainian army as a young man, so he's a platoon leader. He was, I have a picture of Max with his arm around his mother on a couch and the Kalashnikov in his left hand. And we have a project called Worldwide Ukrainian Play Reading. We now have over 100 Ukrainian scripts, plays, and 190 scripts of those plays. So some of them have been translated into multiple languages. We've had readings in 23 countries rather, 50 in America, and they've all been benefits for Max's theater, for hospitals, for children, and we've raised, not through us, $250,000 for the Ukrainians.
Fantastic.
And then what we're doing is we're putting it under a larger umbrella called the Hungarian Hope Initiative. And that's where I learned in Warsaw about another very interesting theater, and that I just supported Maria Szilágyi in a translator's workshop, not out of Hungarian funds, but out of funds, because it's not only are we doing work inside of the Ukraine, but also work in the rings, Hungary, Poland, Belarus, Slovakia, Romania, when I can find projects that can reinforce what's going on there. So it'll be a big commitment for me.
Philip, I would like to have 2 questions with very short answers about your visit right now here in Hungary. 1, what did you enjoy most during this 2 weeks?
Looking into the eyes and hugging multiple decades of friends and picking up a conversation that's never stopped.
2nd, again with a short answer, what worries you most? after this visit?
I'm really concerned about the young people, and that these are very dark times, and to somehow give some air. And that's why I'm thinking about this new project of just putting some money in your hands to help those young people that just, you know, are not going to leave Hungary, but need to somehow not lose touch with the rest of the world. And they're not people like you and me that can travel, that are welcomed, right? They're just at the very beginning. And how not to lose that generation, because they're the future. You know, if there is going to be a future to the planet, you know, if we're not going to crisp up the planet, if there's going to be a future of truth, I mean, it's very difficult to lie in the theater. You have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth with your whole body, with Geza Hegedus's feet, right? And that's what so I want there to be a theater that lives long after me, as long as the species can live. That's about telling the truth about why we're here, how we really should find a way to find love in our hearts for everybody, and war would stop, and you'd see the humanity in people that are totally different from you, because we're so much the same.
Philip, thank you very much for your time. I would like to thank you personally for those very many years of discussions, travels together all around the world, and it's your presence always is somehow giving hope, and I would like to thank you for this hope, and also for you sharing this idea that independence, not depending on institution, not depending on a state, but meeting people and looking into the eyes of people, is very important. This is what we do in theatre, to look in people's eyes on the stage. So thank you again for coming to Hungary, and I want you very much to come back and celebrate with us Színház 60th and 70th birthday, and you were such a great partner at Színház. And I wish you and Carol good health and joy, and I want you to be back in Budapest. Thank you for this talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.